you salty sailors, time to raise anchor and set sail for your best scrawny life. Arr!
Imagine a scenario where I owe you $1. You are hungry, and Johnny has an apple. You don't have any money, but you could exchange the IOU from me with Johnny, and in the end, I would owe Johnny $1 and you would have an apple. This is the basic idea of monetized debt. Someone's promise to pay a debt is the liquidity in this particular monetary system. And this is our monetary system. Monetized debt is the underlying concept of the American monetary system. Let's suppose that Bob wants to buy a car. He goes to the bank for a loan. Bob gives the bank a promissory note, a legally binding document, and the bank gives Bob a certain number of credits in his account. The amount of money in general circulation at this point, let's say, is represented by the letter X. Bob goes to the dealership and buys a car for $20,000. So now the amount of money in general circulation is X plus 20,000. Now, for the most part, Bob's $20,000 spreads out rapidly into the amorphous creature we call general circulation. And some is the dealership spends on electricity, and some goes to advertising, some goes to buy parts for cars, and so forth. But let's suppose that $2,000 of that money goes to the dealership's CEO, and he, being wealthy already, doesn't need the money for immediate expenses, so he decides to buy a certificate of deposit from the bank. This money has left general circulation. It's not as readily available to be earned and spent over and over. So now the amount of money in general circulation is X plus 18,000. Now, over the next several years, Bob has worked at his job, and this is a process. Through this process, he has extracted money from general circulation and used that to pay back his loan. So when the day comes that the loan is paid off, one would think that the amount of money in general circulation would return to X. However, that is not the case because of the $2,000 that was invested by the CEO, and also Bob has been paying the money back with interest. So he's actually paid back $30,000. So when Bob's loan is paid off, the amount of money in general circulation is X minus 12,000. And let's say, just to make the math easy, that in this time the CEO's certificate of deposit has earned $1,000 in interest. So now we're actually sitting at X minus 13,000 in general circulation. This is in effect deflation. In times of deflation, people tend to save their money because the money is increasing in value. This, in other words, they're removing money from general circulation. This could potentially lead to such a loss of liquidity that the economy the function of the economy is affected. So we want the amount of money in general circulation, in our example, to remain more or less at X. But recall that when Bob took out his loan, that money was created with a debt attached. He exchanged a promissory note for the amount of money that was added to his account. More debt will have to be taken on by the population at large in order simply to return the amount of money in general circulation back to what it was before. Now, the simplest definition of capitalism is using money to make money. Using money you have, capital, to make more money, capitalism. Now, more often, the legal framework and underlying philosophy that allows this to take place is also included in that definition. But in this particular case, we're simply going to use the simplest, most mechanistic type of definition. We're just simply talking about capitalism as using money to make money. And we're not at all making a moral statement. We're not at all interested in whether this should or should not be the case. We are concerned with how the system works, not whether or not it is right or wrong. The capitalism in our example was the certificate of deposit that the CEO bought from the bank and the interest he earned on it, as well as the interest that Bob paid to the bank. Capitalism deflates the amount of money in general circulation, which isn't a problem in and of itself, but when it's combined in a system that uses monetized debt, what you create is a continually increasing indebtedness in the population at large. Now, I saw a couple hands go up at the back of the class. A few people think they can see where this is headed, so let me go ahead and say that communism and or socialism are not the answer to the problem. These are commonly presented as somehow being the opposite of capitalism, but this is not the case. You merely need to have a very basic understanding of the Chinese economy to see that capitalism and communism are not opposites in some sort of exclusionary sense. And our own system here also includes elements of socialism and of capitalism. So again, they are not exclusionary. The presence of one does not mean the absence of the other. Recall that in our example, Bob worked to extract money from the general circulation and pay off his loan. Now, in the case of communism or socialism, the government does not produce anything of value to the economy. So it's much simpler. Instead of an ever increasing individual debt in the general population, you simply have an ever increasing national debt. And indeed, this is why we cannot pay off our national debt. It's such a large part of the money in general circulation that if, as we attempted to pay it off, money would become harder and harder to earn, the deflation would lead to economic collapse and everyone would default on their taxes before the debt was actually fully paid off. Likewise, if you had a communist dictatorship of some sort, a non-democratic system, uh, where the government determined that a certain level of debt, a certain amount of money in circulation, uh, suppose we represented that with the letter X, was going to be maintained through taxation, and at the beginning of the year, Bob buys a car for 20,000. The dealership's overall profit from the sale is, let's say, 5,000, and let's say that they paid 15,000 to the manufacturer to buy the car. Then at the end of the year, so Bob has a car, the dealership has 5,000 and the manufacturer has 15,000. At the end of the year, the government comes, and in order to maintain the amount of money in general circulation at X, they take the 5,000 from the dealership and the 15,000 from the manufacturer, because of course they are wealthy, they are class enemies. Um, what is the incentive next year for the dealership to buy a car from the manufacturer and sell it? And what is the incentive for the manufacturer to produce any cars at all? If they did produce any cars, it would be because the government is forcing them to. It would be it would be produced down to a certain level because they can't make a profit on it. So it would be a vehicle that wouldn't be worth owning. It probably wouldn't run. Um, so in that case, there's not necessarily a collapse due to a loss of liquidity, but there is still a type of collapse. Well, here I've spent almost the entire video attempting to mansplain the problem, and as human beings, we're all really good at this. We're all good at identifying the problem and pointing the finger at somebody else. Uh, and I wanted to focus more on solutions, although I've left myself short on time to do that. Perhaps we'll take the matter up in a future video. But consider now that perhaps a system where there are two currencies. One is the currency of general circulation, and the other is the currency of investment. And in order to invest in anything, a person first must exchange or buy the currency of investment with the currency of general circulation. And that the money from the sale of the currency of investment is not the bank's profit. It must be used to retire debt, and therefore the deflationary effect of capitalism is prevented from causing an ever expanding debt in the population. That's an idea that perhaps you could flesh out a little bit more. But I think perhaps in such a system, the idea of interest would have to ultimately be abandoned. I think, though, that the best solutions would be not using monetized debt. Uh, and but the problem here is one of trust. People have to trust that the currency does represent something of value, and someone's promise to pay, someone's promise to repay a debt, has been something that people trust in, has given our currency its value. And creating money is as easy as making a promise. That's important, versus something more difficult like digging up gold or so forth. So, what is something that